it isn't only that I think it's well designed, but the point is that they really participated in it and they had a wonderful attitude about it. And many of these places too, here's another place which I designed. And the thing that I was trying to do in the design of this plaza was to make it a place where people would be able to carry on events so that they would enjoy them and become part of the city, and the city would enjoy it with them. So that it was designed for people's creative investment of themselves in it. And that there's another place which has begun to take on that configuration. Many places can accomplish this even without conscious design that I did with a plaza, and it's heavily used, and it's part of this place which I made so that this kind of thing. Is Charlene here? You here, Charlene? Were you in this picture? Yeah, probably. This is a place which my wife, the dancer Anna Workshop, and the Dancers Workshop chose as the terminus of a day-long city dance where throughout the city people moved and carried out, not dance in the traditional sense of I'm going to make a beautiful pirouette for you, but where the 2 of us or the 5 of us or the 50 of us or the 500 of us can together experience this kind of quality. And there is the fountain, which is designed to relate to the freeway behind it as a piece of choreographed motion in space, and then you can climb up them in many levels, and people can get under it and through it, and it becomes a surround which is for people's theater. And here's as it grows, the place around this has grown. That's the other thing about some of these places, and many of the places that I made in Nicollet and Market Street and this place. If you are aware of the fact that these places can become centers from which other things can happen, both architecture and renewal and other things, then they will. But if you perceive each unit as a intensely inward and exclusive area, which in many cities is beginning to happen, Atlanta is a strange place to me because Omni and other major pieces of architecture are all inward looking, and there's no way of relating them into an outward way where the rest of the community. That's what's wrong with the Bonaventure Hotel here. It's not only that it's a funny looking building, but that it's so exclusive. It excludes everybody. It's a paradigm of nonsensical architecture as far as I'm in the social sense, which after all, in my view, is what architecture is about. It's not painting and it's not sculpture. It's social design, which only reaches its fruition when it accomplishes this creative act of involvement of people. Here's an attempt at social architecture in that sense. Contextually, it's at the foot of Telegraph Hill, an old warehouse district. It's those set of buildings over there. It's a little hard to tell which of the existing warehouses and which the new ones. It's a place, the headquarters for Levi Strauss, which the Levi's people were in this building, occupying most of this tower, and they hated it because it was destroying their relationships between themselves and the people that worked with them on a hierarchical level, and so they moved out of there and moved into this new place, which was designed as a place for people to meet and be part of each other. And there it is, the main plaza. It's the headquarters building, a related series of spaces which include balconies for all the people and step down silhouettes so that it relates to Telegraph Hill. This is a centerpiece of which I designed as a place for children to walk through, that is children of any age, who would really enjoy being part of this fountain and moving through it. And one of the pieces, there's a drawing of it, the original drawing of it. And it takes on many of the same characteristics as you find in natural form by virtue of the shapes and ways that the stone is formed. It builds up images of grottos, of sources, of Moses striking a rock, of the High Sierra, all kinds of things, which then occurs again as people use this space. The architecture is designed so that people penetrate into it. It was done by HOK, one of the really good things that they've ever done, I think. Here, concert at noon. Here are rock concerts in the garden. This is a park that I did on the other side of the street. The two are linked together. There's a hard urban plaza on one side and then a soft green park, that kind of yin and yang that people seem to need. And here at lunchtime, this whole, and you see the balconies which have echoed in a way the Telegraph Hill behind and humanized the shape of the buildings and pulled it down into human scale. All of that seems to work. And there are poetic pieces where people can, I was standing here taking this picture and some young person came over and said to me, "Thank you for bringing back the dragonflies," which was the nicest thing anybody has ever said to me. I thought, this is all part of that. It's what I love about it, by the way, is the fact that instead of moving out to the suburbs, or our version of Orange County, this is within 5 minutes walk of the absolute 100% corner in San Francisco. And the density is quite high, it's 1 million square feet almost. And the normal thing would have been to build a high tower and surround it with some sterile plazas, and that was it. And this instead has been a gesture not only to the 3,000 people who work in this complex, but also to the city as a whole. A remarkable example of public-spirited entrepreneurship, I think. Here, in a different way, is participation on a ritualized level in the environment. We had an extremely interesting thing that happened in San Francisco. Not interesting, horrible. This wonderful place, Mount Tamalpais, was a place where many murders had occurred by somebody who attacked young women on the trail. He killed, I suppose, 10, 15 people. I don't know if you know. And the place became, instead of one of those wonderful places that everybody went to on weekends, a horrible place that nobody could go. And our group decided to take an awareness walk in it and ritualize that. And here they are, moving up the slopes, exhorting, if you wish, the appropriate energies to somehow do away with this horrible thing. Nobody could find that person. They finally got to the top. It was a remarkable day because it was full of tension on one level and exuberance on the other and high idealism. And there they are in this sort of photo montage of what happened during the day, of going up and singing and dancing and drumming, and somebody read poetry. And I cannot tell you whether it was because of that, but 2 days later the murderer was caught. And that had been going on for a year and a half before that. This has to do with, I still am a little nervous when I tell about that because that was a very nervous day. We were concerned to an extent of whether the murderer would join us that day. This has to do with the big landscape. We've been talking at different scales, and I want to just emphasize how this whole attitude applies at a big scale as well as a micro scale as well as at the skyscraper scale, because one of the great things that we seem to be doing more and more is thinking about movement through space, coming through on long vistas in tunnels, and the choreography of car movement through space. This is one of the great rides of the world, coming through that great tunnel and then exploding out to this view. And that is a choreographed sequence which seems to me partly conscious, partly not conscious, but subconscious perhaps. And one of those things which, as environmental designers, I urge you to be thinking about always, and that is the larger scale impact of those things which you are engaged in, whether it's freeway design or buildings or anything else. This is a great model of what can be accomplished. After showing this slide, which I took almost 20 years ago, I want you to see what the skyline now looks like. It's changed a great deal, you see. Yeah. Through a growing forest of buildings that keeps on growing higher and higher in downtown San Francisco. And finally, this idea of choreography, movement through space, and how, in a sense, we are not stabile and we are not static. We are growing. The thing that differentiates humans from other forms, non-organic forms, is that we grow, we move, we change psychologically as well as physically, and that needs somehow to be echoed in how we design for people in motion. And this is a sequence revealed here in plan of downtown Portland, in which on the largest scale that I've yet been able to do it, starts from way down at one end of the city and then moves through a series of pedestrian areas into stopping places that are places for people to accomplish things, either picnicking or playing, or in front of the forecourt of the concert auditorium, a sequence that changes and moves and enriches, I think, the fabric of the city as you move through it. And then the more recent piece is just extended from here, a downtown transit mall, which keeps on going throughout the whole city. And I'll just show you a series of these because that sequence seems to me to be important. It's not only the individual place that you make, but the connections, the linkages, the thought process that induces people to move through, as in Rome or many other great cities where these linkages have been built over time. That's the Lovejoy fountain, perhaps the first fountain that was designed that didn't say don't touch and don't come into it, but please come in and do whatever you'd like. And there is the green Pettigrove Park, the yin and the yang, the movement through the pedestrian ways, which at one time were car vehicles, now converted to pedestrian ways, and the cars have been concentrated in cross streets which link in the other direction. The use of the borrowed landscape, and more intensity as we get more and more downtown. The Auditorium Forecourt, an abstraction of the High Sierra, and built on the principle of the fact that you can, through abstraction of form, still reveal the same experience and nature can emanate from it, not in a naturalistic way, but by the empathy that we can get from it, as if it's designed in that way. The uses that these places are put to. And then gradually, as we get downtown, more and more use. Here's concerts. Very often the water is turned off, but very often it isn't. This is a rock concert that's held. And then as we get downtown, it becomes more and more urbanized. This is a transit mall that I designed, which extends. You see where we've been is up beyond those buildings there, and this is a telephoto shot. We've moved closer and closer down, more and more urbanized, bus stops, shelters, a restructuring of the downtown, I think primarily, and it has transformed Portland. I think anybody will say to you that it has, and particularly since it's been key to the idea of people's empathy with their environment and how it all becomes an integrated piece. And then, after all, change is over time and over season, and we need to pay attention to that, and the poetry of that change is as important as the forms that we make for it. Thank you. I'd be glad to try to answer some questions, if you've got it.
Can you tell me how you got around the physical hazard of that fish ladder in your fountain and allowing children to play in it without some authority on the city worrying about it?
Excuse me, could you repeat the
the question was on the fountains, how did I get away from preventing the authorities from stopping me? Is that right? Is that the question? I've been asked that question before, and I'm not sure I know the answer, except this, that the first one, I don't think they could read plans. You know, they were all in a redevelopment agency and had studied architecture, but they couldn't read plans. And therefore, they didn't know what the hell I was doing. And we let out the contract. I think that's true. And then what happened was this, which may be more interesting. The first fountain, the Lovejoy, was built, and they really didn't know what was going to happen. And a lot of young people came in and really enjoyed it, just the way they should, and they got upset. And they tried to stop them by putting a policeman there, which was dumb. And I talked it over with the redevelopment agency head, who was a very bright guy, and he said, why don't we get some of the young people to take care of it themselves? So they designated some young people who took on the job, and they just simply saw to it that there wasn't any litter and nobody was going to get hurt. And that a modest amount of hallucinatory chewing gum would be used. And nobody got hurt. And so then they said, okay, nobody's getting hurt here. And then about 3 years later, they asked me to do the next one, and the bigger one. And at that point, they said, gee, why don't you do like what you did before? And I said, fine. You're not worried about it? And they said, oh, no, everybody likes it. So it sort of built. And the fact is that nobody has ever gotten hurt in it. Knock wood. It's been 20 years, and nobody's gotten hurt in them. I get sued for things like somebody slipping on a leaf or a banana peel on a flat plaza, but not for any of these. Now, that's the story and the answer. But the real question is this. Why do people not get hurt? And the reason I think that they don't get hurt is what I call the danger principle. And that is that if you see that something is dangerous, you'll take care of it. It's when you don't see that it's dangerous that you get hurt. And these are obviously places you just have to watch out. And there are certain built-in things. There are places where if you fell over and fell straight down, you might hurt yourself, so those are sloped. So that, and I've heard that somebody has fallen over them, but they slide down. You know, a few things like that take care of it. So all of those things are operating.
At SCI-Arc, it was designed so the public could move through and go down to the beaches. Have the residents permitted that to happen? I believe that with the Coastal Commission, it was required, but there have been some problems.
There was at one point problems in the sense that we have had some confrontations, and the confrontations occurred between the salespeople at the Sea Ranch and the residents primarily, because the salespeople have different views about what they're selling than what I had in designing it and the people who came there. But on the whole, the open space has been available for the public all the way along. It was only that the Coastal Commission wanted to formalize that by putting parking lots in certain areas and designating them as public. Do you follow that? And which they have now been authorized to do. And so now the thing is in good order. It always was. The place, that whole controversy was a little built up, I'm afraid. Well, the question, as I understand it, is are some of the code restrictions that we establish both for our buildings and our public spaces limiting the way we live in them, and how could we change that? Is that what you're saying? Right. Well, I think it's a very good question. There's two parts to that. Do I think that they should be modified? And the answer is yes, obviously, including requirements for foundations around buildings, single-family residences and everything. There are a lot of meaningless codes. On the other hand, some coding is necessary. For example, fire codes are important, I think. So I think you can't blame all codes, and some structural codes, you have to be selective, I believe, about that. The other thing is how to change them, and that is by both being reasonably logical about it and also convincing to public authorities. You can't change them by going to the bureaucrats. You have to go to it through the elected officials. And I think that's a long road, which would be well for perhaps the American Institute of Architects sometime to try to tackle. Is that a good answer?
They've been tackling it for 40, 50
Yeah.
years, and they get nowhere.
They get nowhere, Ray says, and yet the fact is that I think that, like the American Medical Association, very often they don't tackle things of that kind of importance because it isn't rewarding enough, not financially, but the amount of energy that it requires is far beyond their most professionals' interest in the subject, I think. Yeah.
Other than children in the fountain, and the phrase adults, and adults on a beach on a weekend, do you feel hopeful that people in the cities, especially in this country, will move towards being closer to their environment in the way that you do?
I think given the chance, they do, sure. In my own lifetime, interest in the Sierra Club and conservation of natural resources and use of the environment, not in a, let's take a let's say a case of beer down to the beach and get bombed, but, and what you can relatedly do with the environment has increased a great deal. And I think that, I'm very hopeful. I think if we don't get knocked out by the bomb, I think we'll do well.
You always use the workshop and design process?
I use the workshop and the design process as often as I can. There are some cases in which I haven't been able to or didn't think it was a useful exercise. No, that isn't true. There is no case that I know of that I've been engaged in that I didn't think it would have been a useful exercise, because they are. There have been some cases where it didn't seem worth trying to do. But whenever possible, I do, and sometimes, and very often I will do workshops within my own group of people who are working on the project, as much as for the people who we're interacting with on a client level.
Do you spend on that, if you're given so much time on a project, how much of it is spent on that beginning phase where you're...
Well, that's part of the problem, and that is that workshops, which are incredibly interesting and very revealing, take a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of emotional commitment. It's like going through psychoanalysis, really. And doesn't take as long, but sometimes it takes. Some communities we've gone on for a year or more. So the limit, that is one of the limitations of it, and how much people are willing to commit themselves. But a lot of usefulness have come out of even weekend workshops with groups of people.
Do you ever give any workshops together with your wife, Anna?
Do I ever give workshops together with my wife, Anna? Yes, a lot. Pardon? Oh, it's taped. That's all right. I don't need this damn thing anyway. Yes, I do. It's we have certain times. That one that I showed you about the thing up the mountain was a process of almost 6 months of workshopping of different things that we did together. And often we do month-long workshops together. There are very often problems of timing and scheduling because she's on a very tight, complex schedule as well as I am, and so we don't always work together. It's not always a good idea anyway. But it's very wonderful when you can do it from time to time. Yeah. However, I should say, excuse me, I'll come back. I should say that a lot of the methodology that has emerged through this workshop has come about by joint effort. It's not mine, and it's not much of it isn't hers. It's a joint revelation that by working together. Yeah. Question of what am I working on now and what would I like to work on? Is that right? I'm working now in Jerusalem. I'm going there next week or 2 weeks from now. I'm a consultant to the mayor on urban problems and how to keep Jerusalem a city which will not be as destroyed by developers as many parts of America. And I go there a lot and work on that. And then I have some particular projects, a whole area of the old city that I'm working on there. Let's see, I'm working on the Holocaust Memorial in San Francisco, the Roosevelt Memorial. I'm doing a small project in downtown Los Angeles. I'm doing another, just started for some strange reason, I'm working a little more in Los Angeles now on some projects which have multi-purpose, not monopurpose, but diverse projects with housing and offices and shopping and sort of that kind of thing here, just in the working state. What else am I working?
Make the people of Los Angeles walk the streets in other areas rather than Westwood, Beverly Hills, the city.
Do I think it would be possible to make people walk here in other places?
Yeah.
I think it would be possible if the environment were designed so that it was something that they would want to do. But have you recently tried to walk around Los Angeles? It's one of the least interesting cities to walk around in that I've ever run into. And there certainly are parts of, I was just, well, if you include Orange County, I was just in Costa Mesa and some other, Newport Beach, and those are areas which, God help me, you can't, unless you're running at 57 miles an hour, you can't, you can't possibly walk around them, nor would you want to. So I think that, and the thing that saddens me about that is this. As I look around at the environment of downtown, no matter what you say about all these tall skyscrapers, they are built as single-purpose towers with a plaza out in front of it that's pure, what's the word? It's just sheer imagery. It has no reality about it at all. Those plazas are not usable. Hi, there's one of the fellows that was in that workshop. And therefore, the plazas really don't perform much function on a social level at all. And therefore, even the open space is a perceived open space. It's not an emotionally satisfying or physically satisfying open space. So the answer to that is that I believe strongly that people would, if they were given the chance on a design level, so that they could, and that it would become interesting, and that the ground floors of the buildings weren't banks or lobbies with a dinosaur turd for a piece of sculpture out in front of it. You know, that, I mean. Next question. Is there a sculptor in the crowd? Yeah.
What do you think you can do for LA?
Not a goddamn thing, I'm afraid. I don't think I'm going to live that long. Because unless somebody would try to tackle LA on the basis of a policy level, which could only come about, I suspect, perhaps through this kind of citywide workshopping and communication and a determination by the citizens of what they really wanted LA to be. We tried on Bunker Hill, if you'll excuse the expression, and I don't know whether any of you have seen the scheme that we designed for Bunker Hill, which had a real streetscape to it. And everybody thought it was incredibly wonderful, but they wouldn't build it because they didn't believe that the developer had enough money. Well, in the meantime, he's built the most expensive project in Los Angeles. But anyway, I think that to answer your question, I think it could be done, but it's going to take a lot of pressure by a lot of people, and I think it could be something that if they believed in it, that the architectural community could have a lot to do about by establishing those. Instead, what happens is they write about postmodern architecture, facadism. I understand that, is it structuralism or something that's the newest fad? Huh? That's out. What's in now? Next year, the hemlines of the buildings are going to go up again, and I presume that Philip Johnson, the year after, will find that buildings should be built with spiked heels or something. I'm not kidding. I find this amusing in a macabre way. Yeah.
What do you think about the streets of New York? You showed the second slide you showed was one really kind of dark, desolate corner. But from my little exposure to the city, the streets are incredibly active.
They are. Depends on what part of the city you go to, though. And I think it's getting worse rather than better, because the buildings are getting higher and higher. The wind pattern is more and more aggravating. The part of the city that is habitable and wonderful is shrinking. I grew up in New York. I haven't grown up yet, as a matter of fact, but I lived in New York until I was 15. And I remember it as a place which extended long distances, way up from the northern part of the Bronx, which was quite wonderful, down to Sheepshead Bay. Now, the only part of New York that's habitable is from 59th Street to 40th Street, and from from the East River to 6th Avenue, something like that. The rest of it is just incredibly ugly, with a few, pockets. Isn't that right? It is, sure it is. So I think that that what we think of as wonderful places in New York, and they really exist, the side streets, 56th, 57th, 52nd, 51st, 40, so on. Some of those side streets between Park and 3rd Avenue are incredibly wonderful townhouse places, but they're very limited in size. Madison Avenue is wonderful. Why is it wonderful? It's wonderful because it has no banks on it. It has small little mom and pop shops. And as you walk along, you can stop in each place and get a different kind of a rye bread sandwich, that kind of thing. And that's why it's wonderful. There's nothing much more complicated than that about it. And where do you find that in Los Angeles? You can't stop on a freeway and go into a delicatessen, No way, Jose. Yeah. Next. Yeah. None of your business. Next question. Actually, one of the places I went this morning, and one of the reasons I went down there was to stop in Costa Mesa and see Noguchi's Plaza, which I saw and wanted to see. And have anybody seen it? Yeah. Do you like it? That's part of what I did down there. Next question. Pardon? Yeah, sure. It's pretty sharp. Hold up your hand. Let me see who asked that question. Well, let me tell you exactly how I felt. As I went in, I had read a glowing report about it, and I think that Noguchi is a great artist. I went in and I was very disappointed at the beginning. It seemed incongruous and confused and didn't hold together. The exits and exits didn't seem to work, and the way it related to the buildings around it, which perhaps weren't his fault, was sort of almost lugubrious, and so on. The more I sat there, though, the more I realized that there was a poetry coming through from it in unknown ways, the placements of the rocks, I guess, and the sound of the water. And so I grew more and more fond of it, not in a formalistic way, but in some sort of spiritual emanation from it. And so I got to enjoy it on that level more and more.
What time of day was it?
It was this morning. How is it at night? Which way? How? Better? Worse? Better. Yeah, I would like to. But again, I want to say that I had mixed feelings about it in the sense that there were all these other questions, but ultimately I got a great deal out of it, out of being there. And after all, that's what the intention of a work of art is. It enlarged my life, let's put it that way, in the way that, you know, the thing that also interests me is this, that the way of putting it together and the intention and the symbolism and the spiritual quality of it is very different than emanates from a landscape architect or an architect. The order of it and organization of it is very different. It's a sculptural organization. That interested me a lot too. And therefore, being in it, since I see an awful lot of architecture and see an awful lot of landscape architecture, most of which I hate deeply, this called up chords in me that I appreciated a lot because of the different sense of purpose and organization.
Would you have a theory about LA, namely that while it expands, it refuses to look inward in a group arc, or until we are imprisoned by something and be willing to go back and revive it, we'll never do it justice?
I think that's true. The thing that horrifies me more, though, to be perfectly honest with you, I think that's right, okay. The thing that horrifies me more, though, is this, that if you look at Los Angeles as a core and a heart with a lot of extensions, bodily extensions, and each one of the pieces of the body, after all, has to have its own uniqueness, too. I mean, my hand is a hand, it's not a heart, right? My head's something. And therefore, each piece of this has to have its own integrity. So therefore, Orange County and Newport Beach and wherever the hell else these places are ought to have that too. Then you could say that they were related to the core and the people living out there would have a sense of linkage and importance. But those places are worse than the downtown of Los Angeles. Those places, in my view, and I must say that it's a very strong bias because I find them so despicable. They are so lacking in any value system, both architecturally and socially and every other way, that I am just startled by how insensitive as communities they are. And naturally, I really loathe them for that reason. And part of it is aesthetic, obviously, but this sort of, what is it that's there except a shopping center, some streets, some reflective glass, stupid buildings, shopping center after shopping center, and the minute you get to where people really want to live and have enough money to do it, they put a gate in front with a guard and say, fuck you, you know. And I really hate them. That's what seems to me more sinister than what's happened to the downtown.
I think that's because we're dependent on the transportation system, and we never really give enough agents to say the railroad center where the refrigerators and the automobiles come from. You know, assume that we can live on a tentacle somewhere, but not give any back.
Well, I think that may be part of it, but don't you think that, you know, in a funny way, I'm not sure about that. It seems to me that that there is something that they are saying to us that they mean to say, and that's what the American social configuration is.
Well, I think LA is unique because of geography. I think we're seeing an example here that is extreme and unfortunate.
Yep. So it isn't only the railroad, it's what people are building there that they want to have somehow, I think. That's what bothers me. Well, I shouldn't be billed as a filmmaker in any way. I got interested in filmmaking largely because I felt that in trying to explain what an idea was in terms of an environment through which you moved and was at a scale that was beyond a small model, that the only way I would like to try making films in order to show what it felt like. Do you follow that? So we worked on the FDR film, which is here, and Shelley will show it sometime in the gallery at some moment next week. There will be wine and cheese served. What? This week, there will be wine. And then the other one was that I made one about Salvador Dalí, and the reason I made one about Salvador Dalí was that they had asked me, for reasons unclear to me, to do a museum for the works of Salvador Dalí in Cleveland. And maybe I ought to quit there while I'm ahead. But anyway, they did. And so I said that I would like to do I figured that any building I could do for him would be as ridiculous as his painting, perhaps, and therefore it would be okay. So I accepted the commission, and then they arranged a meeting with me at the St. Regis Hotel in New York, and Mr. Dali came out, and I told him I was going to do this museum for his work, and he said he was very pleased to hear that, and spent most of his time kissing the hand of my partner, who at that time was a beautiful Chinese lady. And I finally got him off of kissing her hand. If you think I'm kidding, I'm not. And her name was Su Young, in case you want to know. And I said, "How do you paint, Mr. Dali?" He said, because I said, "I'm going to make this thing, and I want to make a place that would be appropriate for painting." Well, he said, "My painting should be seen at E level. E level." And I thought, gee, what has the letter E got to do with it? And he said, "We must have a balcony so you can go up and see it at E level." So that was one thing. And then I said, how do you paint? He said, "Well, I go to sleep at night, and I dream, sleeping, Mr. Dali sleeps, dreaming." And then he said, "In the morning, I wake up, I make le pipi." This is verbatim. I mean it. "I eat le pink grapefruit. I take the bosh, voila." And so I was going to call the film the pee-pee, but instead I called it the Pink Grapefruit, and that's the name of the film, the Pink Grapefruit. And so then we went over and I spent a month with Mr. Dali, partly because I felt, and it is true, that his paintings had a lot to do with a kind of a psychological interaction with his environment, which really interests me very much, and that perhaps, and I didn't know very much about this, but that perhaps a lot of his imagery, which we perceive as surreal, is really quite real. And so I went and I looked a lot of his environment, and I looked at the paintings, and in fact they are. It's a very surreal landscape, and much of the work that he does is very related to the actual environment, like Gaudi's work. And so that's what the film is about, how this interaction goes on. But it is called the Pink Grapefruit. So that's my career. No, I made another film. The FDR film is a very nice film that I simply was a resource for. It was made by Glenn Fleck. Do all of you know Glenn Fleck? You should. A wonderful filmmaker here in Los Angeles, works in Santa Monica, used to be in charge of Charlie Eames's office. You'll see it. It's a very good film using camera motion through spaces that are built particularly for that. You get a real sense of it. Any other question? Maybe we ought to quit. What? Huh? Shall we quit? All right, we quit. There's wine and cheese in the gallery. Huh? Just wine, no cheese. The hell with the cheese. I'll see you over there.